In Omenandum, Fort Benning, has the military contacted you about the book? What do you think that the military interest in the Necronomicon is? Simon, the military has never officially contacted me, although that first edition drew a lot of letters on official Army and Air Force stationery, including a letter of praise on the stationery of the Strategic Air Command, which stands out in my mind as the most bizarre letter we ever received from the military. Again, these were not official communications in the sense that the book was getting a Pentagon seal of approval. The occult scene in New York City in the 1970s and 1980s was a source of concern for the government, or for certain factions thereof. We all knew this. There was always someone at the periphery of what was happening who had a shadowy government background, who played golf with Al Haig, or had lunch with spies. I was not the only one accused of all this. We understood that there was penetration of the occult scene by the FBI, which had successfully infiltrated themselves into the Klan, the American Nazi parties, the Black Panthers, and that the occult lodges and covens were a likely target as well. In the case of the political parties, the FBI would have worried about Soviet manipulation, and thus had, in their eyes at least, legitimate cause for concern. In the case of the occult lodges, they were viewed as nests of drug dealers, addicts, and counterculture people who crossed over into the political arena from time to time. One particular author on witchcraft and paganism is known to have worked briefly in the sugarcane fields of Castro's Cuba, for instance. Thus, there would have been more than enough reason to look closely at the lodges and covens. Then, of course, the famous Timothy Leary case. Add to that the CIA's interest in occultism from the point of view of the technicians of projects like MKUltra, and often who wish to assess the actual powers and abilities of occultists for military and intelligence purposes. So it should not be surprising to find every cross-section of American life involved in some way or another in the New York City occult environment of the 1970s-80s. There was also another concern, from my point of view. The occult groups represented ad hoc social organizations that could conceivably be manipulated by an intelligent enemy, or could represent a threat to established social organizations, an alternative government, in a way. We had people who were expressing loyalty to concepts and churches that were outside the American mainstream. The formation, development, and administration of these groups would have attracted the attention of social scientists and government programs, I believe, since they mirrored so faithfully the fledgling political parties of the age. Groups like the SDS and the Weathermen, the Panthers, etc. Had the occult movement found common cause with the anti-war and revolutionary movements, then the U.S. government would have been in serious jeopardy, because then you would have had the perfect marriage between political ideology and spiritual technology and belief. One of the failures of Soviet communism, I believe, was its inability to completely replace religious and spiritual sentiments in the relatively few years of its existence. The scientific attitude to politics cannot adequately explain emotional power, paranormal phenomena, or the purpose of life to the average man or woman. It can only complain that religion is the opiate of the people, which may be true, but communism alone could not provide the equivalent of a spiritual methadone clinic. Thus, we have the spectacle of scientists like the late Carl Sagan, who railed against what he called superstition, using rather, to my mind, unscientific methods to prove his points. I wonder, not unkindly, if Sagan was comforted in his last moments by someone standing over his bed and reciting Newton's second law of motion. Is the attitude, then, of modern scientists, quantum physicists generally accepted, really a candle in the dark? Or is it mere whistling in the dark? The problem rests in the inadequacy of language, I think, and the inability of occultists to express their ideas, and their opposition to scientific posing, in terms more intelligible than the usual political pamphlet or anti-war broadside. Isaac Newton may have been the last great occultist scientist, and his writings were, alas, more devoted to the obscure jargon of alchemy and biblical encryption than to a description of the soul's machinery. Thus, science could break occultism, at least in the popular mind, by associating occultists with ignorance and superstition, loaded code words for people not blessed with government research grants. The government could break the anti-war, revolutionary movements by associating them with all sorts of violence, often instigated by their own agents provocateurs, and marginalize their political views as communist. Had the occultists and the revolutionaries joined forces, however, the whole history of the 1960s-80s might have been different. Vide the Thule Gesellschaft and the Nazi Party. Thankfully, the occultist of the 1960s was less a social creature than an individual attempting to use ritual to reach God. That type of occultism is rather less social than, say, religion, which relies on a group mind and tightly scripted and socially approved rituals. The occultist of the 1960s was a revolutionary of the soul, and as such, could not be bothered by the more materialistic revolution promised by Marx and Engels, Lenin and Mao. While the occultist may have short-circuited himself or herself politically, the service done to society as a whole has yet to be evaluated. If nothing else, the self-centered and self-involved American occultist of the 1960s was removed from the great social upheavals of the anti-war movement in the sense that he or she did not bring any sophisticated cultic influence to bear on the political aspect of that movement, unlike the influence of Teutonic mystics on the German political movements of the post-World War I era. And for that, we have to be thankful, for the occultist of the period did not have the political intelligence or social skills to create a new movement that blended, in a positive, life-affirming, liberty-affirming way, both spirituality and political organization. The best we could offer at the time was the Blue Equinox. Today, those occultists, those who have survived, are of an age to make a real contribution should they choose to do so. They have matured. They have lived through the same political upheavals as the rest of America: Vietnam, Watergate, the Reagan years, Iran-Contra, etc., and have developed their spiritual understanding to a greater degree. They have become more realistic, less ethereal, have more to say. They have also witnessed science moving tentatively in their direction. We are, I believe, on the verge of a spiritual awakening and revolution in America, one that was predicted by General Douglas MacArthur so many years ago when he said, "We have had our last chance. If we will not devise some greater and more equitable system, our Armageddon will be at our door." The problem is basically theological and involves a spiritual recrudescence. It must be of the spirit if we are to save the flesh.